kill this prostitute. I find that repugnant, obviously.
I think that's why this has happened.
Yeah, equally repugnant is the fact that when people, often women, levy this kind of criticism at games like this, they are attacked. And that is what Gamergate is about. It's about, and actually a friend of mine, Kate Miltner, wrote a piece on this from the perspective of someone trying really hard to remember to have her journalistic ethics in place, and she would wander off and start criticizing the game for its, a disgusting depiction. She'd be like, sorry, my bad, I strayed. Let's talk about the art direction. And that really highlighted the ludicrousness of the whole Gamergate response, saying, that it's not your place to criticize the content.
Absolutely, and I think that we've got to move on in a second, but I think that's absolutely the point, is that if a woman can't have a space online, can't have a space in person, and can't have any kind of space in which to comment on the discourse or the culture of video games at all, then quite frankly, where are we in 2014? It's just disgraceful. But on a more positive note, I want to read you this tweet, Alanah. This is from Shannon Gulpin, who says, so glad that you're having Alanah on. Women need examples on how to speak up and fight back effectively.
Amen.
So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, amen to that. Absolutely. All of us here definitely agree. But we've got to move on, because from NFL controversies to the Why I Stayed Twitter campaign, domestic violence is another national conversation, making many headlines. Many understandably have a lot to say on the issue, including Vice President Joe Biden. Speaking before the White House Tribal Nations Conference on Wednesday, Biden called violence against women an epidemic that, quote, cuts to the very core of how we measure ourselves as a society. Now, this conference focuses on the plague of violence against Native American women, who face some of the highest rates of domestic abuse in America. In his speech, Biden goes on to speak of the obligation that men have in particular to step in and stop domestic violence if they see it in their homes and communities, saying, quote, it's not about vigilantism, it's about intervening. If you can stop it when you see it. To me, it's the definition of manhood. It's not about standing by and saying, well, that's a family affair. So, Rachel, what do you think about, Vice President Biden's stance on this here? I mean, we've had he for she. We've seen that campaign by the UN earlier this year. What do you think about what he had to say to men?
I think that obviously making this not just the woman's problem is important. But what struck me in sort of hearing about Vice President Biden addressing this in Native communities is, again, it really drives home the fact that institutions are incentivized to protect their reputations and protect the status quo. So what we see happening with violence against women in Native American communities, we see is the same thing happening with violence against women happening on campus. And we see is that, you just see that over and over and over again as institutions retrench and protect themselves. I mean, and we saw that with the Catholic Church and the sexual abuse scandals there. So I think that expanding the ambit of responsibility is important, because this isn't just a problem that women have and women should have to deal with. But I do think that it's not just about families. It's very much part of what is tolerated by our institutions that have the power and that establish the status quo.
Yeah, Chloe, what do you think about that? I mean, they're kind of almost the shift away from maybe governments and what they should be doing to sort of curb this, and sort of Vice President Biden almost shifting the focus again back on people, on young men and men in communities.
Well, I don't see the two as mutually exclusive. I don't see him shifting responsibility. I see him adding, spreading and sharing responsibility. And I think the effort to redefine manhood as standing against violence against women, that's what it means to be a man, is a very, very powerful stance to take. Nothing is more powerful than questioning a man's manhood. It's a very powerful way to get at them and to get them to change their behavior. That we see that being used in really violent and damaging ways, but if it can be used positively and say, no, actually in 2014, this is what it means to be a man, so you need to step up if you want to be included in that category. But I think it's really important to be clear that we are not, or I'm certainly not, advocating for men to save women, rescue women. We are not saying that manhood means, as the president says, the vice president says, vigilantism, or being a white knight or being a savior. This is about women as equals.
Right. Yeah, Katie, what do you think?
Well, I think that in terms of shifting the responsibility, to Joe Biden's credit, first of all, I love Joe Biden, but that may have been the longest stretch he's ever gone without a major gaffe. So I want to commend him. But
commend him on that.
Yes. No Bidenism that I heard. But to his credit, he's done a lot, I mean, to make the government accountable and responsible for responding to violence against women. And what was so heinous about what was happening in Native communities was that they literally did not have jurisdiction over white rapists or white sexual domestic violence perpetrators. Thank you. I need to go to law school.
As in this year, they haven't had jurisdiction over that.
And they still don't have jurisdiction, you're saying, Alanah?
Yeah, that's my question.
No, isn't it part of the Violence Against Women Act actually? Yeah, gave it back, gave them the jurisdiction, which I love. I actually love when Republicans vote against Violence Against Women Act because it's just wearing it on their sleeve, you know. And I do agree that if butching up means intervening in domestic violence, that's great. I'm all for the Butch campaign.
Yeah, I like this. And Alanah, I'd be curious, what do you think about particularly what Chloe was saying, this idea of redefining manhood as meaning sort of standing and seeing women as equals?
I think it's really important because a lot of this seems to be, with the hashtag not all men, where men feel defensive. I sometimes feel like I have to be like, of course we're not referring to all men when we say that men hit women. No one means that all men do. And I think that men need to stop feeling defensive about that and start seeing themselves as allies. And I do think that questioning their manhood is a really, really good way to do that. But I haven't actually thought of that before, that if you're saying, if you don't want to be part of a hashtag movement where you have to say not all men and stick up for yourself, then be a man and stick up for people anyway. Stop defending yourself. Just see every other human being as an ally. And if you have a place that you can help, you should definitely help.
Absolutely. Well, I want to move on because we're running out of time, and I want to get to this story because it was one that really hit me very hard this week. We come to the part of the show that we call 3 Steps Back. And this week, it's just hard to convey how appalled we were to hear about the murder of Tuche Albayrak. 22-year-old Albayrak was beaten to death after she heard 2 girls being harassed in a McDonald's bathroom and intervened. She was then turned on by 2 men who subsequently struck her with a baseball bat, leading her to fall and hit her head in a parking lot outside the restaurant. Now, the ordeal, as you saw there, was caught on grainy video footage, and doctors said that she would never fully recover. And on her 23rd birthday, after 2 weeks in a coma, her parents took her off life support. Chloe, so this is just such an appalling story, and we've just been talking about not wanting men to come and save us, and here was a woman who was standing up for other women, and then this happened. I mean, how do we even begin to unpack this story?
It is an appalling story, and I also think it exists on a spectrum that we've been talking about for the last half hour, right? Alanah is standing up for herself and speaking out against threatened violence against herself and by implication, against other women. And this young woman was doing exactly the same thing offline in the real world, and the consequences were fatal. This stuff exists on a spectrum, right? The price for speaking out in favor of women's equality, in favor of an end of violence to violence against women, depending on how you choose to speak out, on what kind of a personal risk you take, the consequences can be very, very dire. And in this case, it was deadly. But this is all, like I said, this is part of the ecosystem that we live in. This is not that, it's not that out of the ordinary. It's not that unusual. It's just a more extreme expression of something that we live with every day.
And I have to say, Rachel, I mean, this event really sort of took hold. We saw the funeral for Tuche, and there were just dozens, hundreds of people that were there sort of in support mourning this wonderful young woman who sadly was taken away from everybody. How do we take anything from this that's even remotely positive?
It's hard to find the silver lining here.
Yeah.
I mean, when tragedies happen, the silver lining comes in the reaction and the awareness that comes from it, and the conviction that people have, and sort of the fact that there is a reaction which leads to pressure on people in authority, and leads to media pressure, and puts the spotlight on people of power to quote unquote do something, and that includes repercussions for perpetrators, like harsh repercussions, it's hard not to have my mind go to Ferguson and Mike Brown and Eric Garner here in New York. It's really hard because we've just had now 2 really good examples of violence against unarmed people by police resulting in death. and the signaling that's come from that, which is that that authority will not do something, that the system will not react and won't do something. And we've seen the outcry from that. So when you talked about like what positive can come of it, like hopefully change, hopefully doing something. It's just that change never seems to happen fast enough. I mean, I don't have a good answer for that.
But I think that you're right in that, and Time magazine actually tweeted out, sort of echoing what you're saying, the killing of this student teacher has galvanized Germany. And you can see there, obviously, mourners, more than 141,000 people signed a petition demanding a posthumous medal for Tuche, which just shows really just how deep this has struck everybody. Alanah, what do you have to say about this?
I totally agree that change is the only positive that can come of this, but this entire conversation, I just can't help but think, I wish there was something that we could be more proactive about to stop massive things like this, especially the reference to Mike Brown, to help people actually be aware of these kind of things. And it sucks that something terrible has to happen to one person in order for us to all react to it. This kind of made me really upset. I wish that we could do something faster to stop this from happening in the first place, but that's definitely got to be the only silver lining there, is that people are aware and people are talking about it, and the more that people talk about it, the less acceptable it is, I suppose.
Yeah, Katie, what do you think?
Well, I think one kind of point that is important to highlight, and hopefully this will highlight, is that, there is not necessarily such a separation between violence against women and harassment, right? I mean, I'm guilty of this too. And obviously there is a difference between saying something to someone and hitting someone with a bat. But the notion that this woman was killed and punished for daring to attempt to stop men from harassing other women is just so scary. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's interesting because you brought up the Eric Garner and Mike Brown case, and I feel like there's this insecurity, this masculine insecurity that's kind of present among all these men who have some weird issues, and if we could force them to go to therapy, I'm serious, just like preemptive therapy for all men or something, because I feel like they have so many issues. And what happened to them when they were a kid that they need to do this?
Masculinity happened to them.
What ex-girlfriend did what to you? I'm sorry about your penis.
Is it masculinity though, Chloe?
I do. I think that there are enough cases of this in various iterations, in various forms, that it's no longer a viable explanation to say this individual has problems and this individual has problems and all these millions of individuals have individual problems. We are talking about a cultural, systemic problem. We are talking about a really, really toxic masculinity.
Yeah, Alanah, what were you going to say?
I think it's a culturally ingrained problem where they're all afraid of feeling emasculated, which I would say is directly related to this woman being beaten with a baseball bat. It's likely because they were like, how dare a woman stand up for herself? How dare this woman talk to me when they think they're all tough and they're a man? And
how dare this woman tell me? How dare this woman tell me that I'm not entitled to behave however I like towards these other women?
In a bathroom, in a woman's bathroom.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is awful. And actually, on that notion of sort of, kind of preemptive therapy as well, I've got this message here from Jose A, who's been watching. He says, manhood is being redefined for a long time. Way too many things have been accepted as, quote, being a man, that I wonder how long it will take for this new idea of manhood to become the norm. Indeed, I think that it's going to take time, and it is going to probably take a generation, if we're really honest, for all of this work that's going on right now, of which all of you ladies are a big part of. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today on WMN, because you really are a big part of this whole new movement. Guys, thank you so much, Alanah, Chloe, Katie, and Rachel for being with us today on HuffPost Live. And guys, thank you so much for commenting and for tweeting, of course. If you want to find out any more about any of the stories that we've been discussing, including more on all of our guests' work, check out the links in our resource well below. And if you've got suggestions for stories, tweet me at CaroMT, use the hashtag WMN, and stay here. The conversation always continues on HuffPost Live.